Welcome, my dear young friends. Today, this discussion is going to be on the adjustments in respect to not for profit organization. Generally, the students find it a little difficult to understand the adjustments in respect to both expenses and incomes. So, it's a short video presentation upon the various aspects of the expenses and the incomes and how these are being adjusted in accordance with the not-for-profit organizations. So let's move into our understanding over here. See, generally, the expenses would be given at two places over the question part. So one is we find them in the list of adjustments. Again, sometimes these adjustments would relate to the previous balance sheet. That is the question part when it presents an opening balance sheet, or as the details over the opening balance sheet is being given, you find these adjustments given over there. So to begin with, the expenses that are given in the list of adjustments, always understand that these adjustments go towards the current year, the year in which we are dealing with, or the preparation on the receipts and payments account, as well as the income and expenditure account. So here first we will take into account the expenses. Expenses like salaries, rent, or any other expenses. So in case if there is an outstanding expense mentioned over in the list of expenses in the adjustments, then this should be added back to the expenses. Similarly, when in case the outstanding expenses are given over your previous balance sheet, that is your question balance sheet, in that case, that needs to be subtracted from the total money expense that is being given over. See, I'll just show you why. The reasons also quite specific it is. Let us imagine that we are working on the current year. So we'll just take a quick example over here. I'll just mention over here. So we are referring to the current year. So let's imagine our current year to be 2020 and 21. All right. So we will take the current year as 2021. I will mention over here. The current year is to be taken as 2020-21, which ranges from 1st of April 2020 to 31st of March 2021. Now we are talking about the expense. So what does it indicate? The outstanding expense of the current year, which means that it belongs to the same year which we are talking all about, that is 2020-21. Now when you say outstanding expense of the previous year, what does this previous year indicate? 2019 and 20. See, this expense is pending over the previous year, which is being paid for in this year. So this does not belong to 2021, the current year. That is how we subtract from the list of expenses over here. So the understanding is very simple. Income and expenditure account will take into account all those items which belongs to the current year. So in this way, the outstanding expenses of the current year, which is given under the list of the adjustments, would be added. Outstanding expense, which is given on the liability side of your opening balance sheet, which forms a part of the question many times, or we need to prepare this opening balance sheet, in whichever case it is, that this would be subtracted from the total expenses. Let's move on, students. Also, we find prepaid expenses. The basic understanding, prepaid meaning that for the future year that we have paid it in this year itself. Now the same thing continues over here. In case prepaid expenses are found in the list of the adjustments, it refers to the current year's prepaid. Now when you are talking about current year's prepaid, actually you have paid it for the next year. See, let us imagine 2021 to be our basic current year. Okay, so we are talking about 2021. So when you speak about 2021 over here, the current year happens to be 2021. And when you talk about the current year advance pay, it belongs to 21-22. You should understand that the current year advance money being paid will go to the future year. So I will represent over here. Let's take it like this. So current year being 2021. So here we are talking about current year. Current year represents 20. 21. So you're paying the advance. Let us imagine advance rent paid. Okay. So the advance rent paid, which is paid in 2021, actually it is paid for 21 and 22. So it does not belong to the current year. So therefore it should be subtracted. Now, in case if you find this prepaid expenses in the previous year's balance sheet, usually it is found on the asset side of the balance sheet. So previous year, what does this previous year indicate for us? 2019 and 20. So there you have paid it in advance. That is in the year 2019 and 20, you have paid it in advance. To which year it belongs to? It belongs to 2020 and 21. This is the current year we are talking about. I told you that income and expenditure account will take into account all the current year's items. So that is why the previous year's advance payments, if any, has to be added to the nature of the expense. So I bring it to you once again. Prepaid expenses, which is given in the list of adjustments during the current year, you will subtract from the total expenses being given. On the other hand, if you find any prepaid expenses that is being given in your opening balance sheet, which belongs to the previous year, that needs to be added back to the expense. Now let's talk on the incomes. The incomes part also holds a similar kind of understanding. So we have incomes yet to be received during the current year. So this belongs to the current year, the incomes that needs to be received by the NPO. Where is it given? It is given in the list of the adjustments. So this will be added back to the existing income money. On the other hand, if the same item, income yet to be received, is found in the opening balance sheet. So if it is given in the opening balance sheet, then it should be subtracted because this belongs to the previous year. So necessarily it needs to be subtracted. Now you also have another category of incomes, that is we say it is like prepaid, that is received in advance. Instead of prepaid, it would be wiser to call it as received in advance. So when you have received incomes in advance for the current year, it belongs to the next year. It belongs to the next financial year. So this item has to be subtracted. On the other hand, when the same transaction it is found in the opening balance sheet, then it belongs to the current year. Just like expenses, how we have discussed, there is not much difference between the expenses and income over here, and that should be added back to the incomes given. Now also students, you must be in a position to make this record into the balance sheet also. So while recording in the balance sheet, time and again remember that only the current year's adjustments would get recorded in the balance sheet. You will not repeat whatever the adjustments that are given over in your question balance sheet because they belong to the previous year. So the current year's adjustments alone will figure out in the closing balance sheet. So when you're drafting the closing balance sheet, remember the list of adjustments, what is given at the end part of the question. From there, it says that we will draft the adjustments being taken into the balance sheet, closing balance sheet. So here when you're doing so, remember this particular chart as to which side of the balance sheet does each item would be recorded. Outstanding expenses of the current year, we have to record on the liability side because the expenses are yet to be paid. It's a liability for the NPO. Accrued income, which marks the income earned but not received. This you find it on the asset side of the balance sheet. Similarly, prepaid expenses that you have paid for the future years, that would be taken on the asset side of the balance sheet. And income received in advance. You have received the money, but you are yet to work for the NPO. So this would appear on the liability side of the balance sheet. Now I will show you an example here, a very simple example. What we have discussed, I have taken an example of the subscriptions. Remember, subscriptions represent the membership fees receipt. It is a receipt. I have taken a receipt to depict all these adjustments. Now they have given you subscriptions received during the year. So how do you make these adjustments? Look at this chart which appears on the screen. Subscriptions received in advance during the previous year, that is for the current year only you have received it in the previous year. So that belongs to the current year, you need to add it. This adjustment, where do we find it? We find it in the opening balance sheet. Similarly, subscriptions outstanding at the end of the year would be given in the list of the adjustments, should be added to the given subscriptions money. Subscriptions received in advance for the next year. This also we will find it in the list of adjustments being given. This needs to be subtracted. And if any subscriptions outstanding for the previous year is found on the asset side of the previous balance sheet, this needs to be subtracted. So here, this is how the income and expenditure account shows the adjustment in respect to subscriptions. The same methodology would be followed even in respect to expenses also. This is a receipt. I have given an example of the receipt over here. So we follow the same kind of instructions over the expenses part also. So hope this video would be useful for you to learn the adjustments in respect to only the expenses as well as incomes in respect to NPO. We do have depreciations, sale of asset and such other adjustments which we will discuss in yet another video presentation. So for today, bye from me. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.